Hey everyone, welcome to the Shake Me Awake podcast with Jen. It's taken me 40 years to finally wake up to my true potential, my authenticity, my purpose, and my passion in life. I can't go back to sleep, and I want you to wake up with me. Every week we'll be talking about the journey of opening your eyes to the life you were meant to lead, how to show up as the real you in this one life we've been given, how to live more authentically, and how to find your true purpose instead of sleepwalking through life like so many of us are doing. I want you to wake up every day filled with purpose and passion and show up as the true you, because otherwise, life is exhausting. I am committed to living each day authentically and with true purpose, and I want you to join me. Follow this podcast and visit my website at shakemeawake.com. Be part of a community of people who are done sleeping through life. Hey everybody, my guest on today's episode is Christina Smith. She's a midlife mentor, coach, author, speaker, and host of the Inviting Shift podcast, and just all around somebody that was really easy to talk to. We had some really great conversations, and she had some good insight into why so many of us are feeling this calling halfway through our lives. I love it because on her website, she says a midlife crisis is an unanswered calling. And wow, that really hit me. We talk about the belief systems we grew up with, the expectations of others, the fear, how to show up authentically. And most importantly, she talks about choosing thriving over surviving. It's a beautiful conversation, and just listening to her feels like a meditation on this topic. So be sure to check it out, and I hope you love it as much as I did.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited about this.
Me too. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing, what you're up to right now?
Yeah. I am a midlife coach, which means that I have the pleasure of helping women like rediscover the second half of their lives. And I think a lot of us didn't think about that. I know I didn't think like, what would I do after 50? I guess we all just thought we were going to sit in a rocking chair and be happy for the rest of our life. I'm not sure what that was. But I think it's a really pleasant surprise to a lot of women that they are still feeling healthy enough to like want to have almost a second life after 40 or 50. And that's what I do is I help them uncover that and become really confident and a lot of self-love so that they can feel really good about how they're showing up in the world.
I absolutely love that. I've heard other people call it like a midlife awakening. I was calling it a half-life awakening. But I am definitely going through that. And that's what prompted my coaching. I've started coaching. It's what prompted my podcast, Shake Me Awake. It was very much a what the hell have I been doing with my life? Because I followed the recipe of
Mhm.
success, after high school, go to college, get a degree, get married, have babies, right? Check it off.
Boxes, yep. I checked all those boxes too, and they made me so depressed.
And then how many of us went through a divorce and then we
Mhm.
found ourselves through divorce? And yeah, God, there's so many of us in the same boat. So how amazing that you are specifically working with women like that. I love that. What led you to that other than your own journey, probably?
Yeah, exactly. I did the same thing. I checked all the boxes, and at 35, when I was supposed to be happy, because my mother said that I would be happy when I checked all these boxes. So I did it. And I was like, why am I crying on the way to work every morning? Like, why am I sitting here constantly shaming myself for not being grateful or happy or positive? And it hurt to fake it, it hurt to like put that happy face on every day when I wasn't feeling good. And so I had to do a lot of work on myself. And then I was like, oh, right, because life doesn't really have to be like this. There's a lot of perspectives to how life can look. And especially when the kids start like moving out and you have less responsibilities with them, it's like, well, what am I going to do for the rest of my life? Like there's a lot of people who are afraid to retire because like even though they can technically retire, they don't know what they would do with their lives because that was the only identity that they really hung on to. And so letting go of that is it's so exciting because it's like, what do you mean? What do you want to what do you want to do? Like do whatever you want to do. And I think
Right?
we put so many limits on that it's really, I like to call it a midlife calling, and until you don't listen, and then it becomes a crisis.
Well, that's brilliant. I love that. I've never heard it said like that, but you're so right. I mean, I think some of it too is we were so structured and guided in the first half of our lives that when you say it's completely open, what do you want to do? It's like we get stuck and we're like, oh, I don't know. I never really considered it.
Too many options
Yeah.
sometimes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely facing that. Now it's like I have so many things I want to do that I can't contain myself. I'm
Mm.
doing a podcast and I'm coaching and I have a thrift resale business and it's like I'm trying to do so many things because all of a sudden the world is completely open to me. And I wish it had been that way when I was younger. And so that's something that I've started looking at is how can I now talk to my kids about responsibly, because there's got to be a little bit of responsibility in there. And I know a lot of that is what my parents were trying to impart is, when I said, well, I want to be whatever, a hairdresser for the rest of my life. That not that there's anything wrong with that, but my parents sort of tried to guide me away from that for various reasons. Um, and so, if my son said, well, I want to be a street artist, I would probably have a little bit of anxiety about that,
Yeah.
even though I want them to be happy, and I want it. But you worry a little bit about their financial security, which is what we were also focused on. And then now we're flipping it. So it's
Mm.
really interesting. How do you help women find what they can do for the rest of their lives when it's just open to them and they're not sure what direction to go?
Yeah, I actually have a process for it. So yeah,
Awesome.
so it's really about for me, most women have made a vision board or 12 in their lives, or at least get the idea of it, right? So we have these pictures in our mind or on a board about like the happy family or the big house or the car that we want or the vacation that we want. And really, we want all of those things because humanly, we think we're going to feel a certain way when we get them, right? That's why we want what we want, is because we think that when we have that, do that, accomplish that, that I'm going to feel a certain way. And if we just made that the goal rather than the big house or the big car or whatever, then we're aligning with what we really want. So let's say I want a big house because I want to feel security and freedom. Maybe that's the thing for me, and it could mean a million things to different people. So but for me, let's just say that's what it is. Well, then I want to go down a path of freedom and security, and what does that look like? So if anything doesn't align with freedom and security, and this year my words are love, bold, and open. If things don't feel like love, bold, or open, they're not right for me. And
Mm.
so I know now that I'm at least on this path, and that gives me a little bit more focused look at what I want, right? So that I'm not getting sidetracked by these things that are like, oh, I'm going to take that board position because because I want that title, or whatever these other things are. And it's like, but does that title feel like bold, open, and love to me?
Mm.
And maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't. But if it doesn't align with me, it's probably not for me. And I think that we make that really challenging, but it's really quite a simple process. And all of my clients go through it before we start coaching, because I need to know what is it that they're actually desiring? And it's those feelings. And so when we can do that, I can constantly remind them to come back to that.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, it goes back to this thing that's a buzzword right now, but it really is about authenticity and figuring out who you are at your core, what you value, what you prioritize, what you want out of life. Because without that framework, so you really answered the question about how do we go from such a structured, this is the path, these are the check boxes to now this freedom. Well, it's not entirely freedom. There's still got to be some kind of structure, but it's bringing it back to the basics of what's the core of me that
Mm.
can then support what it is that I'm wanting to do. I love that. That is brilliant. So how do you yourself, or how do you help others, I guess, um, face that trying to be authentic when you've been this other way for so long, because that's really scary.
It is a challenge. Yeah. I mean, to the point where I look back and go, wow, my 20-year-old self would think that what I do today is like ridiculous. Is that even a job? Like, I mean, so I was definitely, I was smart. So my mom was always like, a lawyer, a doctor, that's what you should be. Like those are the two professions that somehow, and I was on the law school path for a while, until the law school money fairy didn't come. So I've always been like a very practical person. I've also been, my mother used to tell me I'm too sensitive. Well, the thing is, I started leaning into my gifts and going, well, what if sensitivity is actually a gift? And when I started leaning into sensitivity as a gift, I was like, of course it's a gift. My body is so sensitive that it tells me what I can and cannot eat as long as I'm paying attention to it. Um, Sensitivity is a gift that I am really sensitive to other people's energy. So I read people very well because of my sensitivity. So there's so many gifts. And when I can look at all the pieces of my gifts and say, how do I use these gifts while still feeling love, open, and bold, or whatever my words were at the moment, it opens up possibilities that a lot of times our ego or our logic want to break down and go, nope, that seems flaky, that seems crazy. Like even the idea of calling myself a life coach like seems like cringe sometimes because of the connotations that people have put on it. And there's so many different types of life coaches. So I mean, so yeah, it can feel uncomfortable, but as long as it feels like it's in alignment, I think that that's the thing that's most important. And I heard you say about the word freedom. Well, I have a client where, whew, she couldn't tap into how she wanted to feel, and so we were doing an exercise, and freedom came out, and like it took her breath away, and she was like, "Ah," and I was like, "What was that?" And she goes, "That just feels too hard. Freedom. I can't be free. I have kids. I have jobs. I have things." And yet I was like, well, it sounds like the perfect word for you if
Mhm.
it's taking your breath away. And what happened with it was that months and months as she was sitting with it, she realized she was a lot more free than she thought. She was like, wow, I actually have a choice right now. I can stop working and go hang out with my family. That's free. I am the one who's making myself work late hours and do these things. So she just became more and more conscious over the fact that she actually had choice in her life. She just did not step up to it. She didn't acknowledge it. She put these limitations on, this is how I should do things. All the check boxes. This is how I'm supposed to do them, rather than how does it really feel for me to do them in a way that feels good to me.
Yeah, why do you think we're all so afraid to show up the way we want?
Ooh, that's a loaded question. Probably a lot of childhood stuff. I mean, I don't know anybody, especially of my generation, Gen X, whose parents didn't say, what will they think? Whoever they are, like we were all told, like, oh, you can't wear that. What will they think? You can't say that. What will they think? You can't do that. What will they think? And so we started to think that whoever they are is much more important than what we think. And that takes away, it almost invalidates the fact that if we aren't part of the way that culture wants us to do things, or the way that my mom projects that culture wants us to do things, then suddenly we're wrong. And really, there's a million ways to do the same thing, right? And sure, some of them could be more efficient or more productive than others, but some of them might feel really good to take twice as long to do the same thing, right? And so I think it's just we've been made to think that our inner wisdom is not valid and that there's only this one way. It's very black and white thinking in our culture. It's like, this is the right way. And if it's not this way, it's wrong.
I am watching Downton Abbey for the first time. I don't know if you've ever seen it,
Mhm.
but the time period that it's in right now is 1924, so 100 years ago. And it's crazy when you were explaining the thing about like, what will they think? And I've got to make sure that I do things. It's like, oh my gosh, we are not far off. from what was going on 100 years ago, which was
Sure.
living by other people's standards, living by other people's expectations. How
Mhm.
the heck do we break free of that and live our own lives?
Ah, ooh, well, and that's why we come up with the intentions, right? Like those feelings that we really desire, because that's how we break free, is going, if it doesn't feel this way, it's probably not for me. Law school, med school was not for me. It did not feel like I wanted to be in school another 4 years just to go do a really high intense job that had a lot of stress, either one of them, right? Like that, and that's so anti our culture, right? Because we're supposed to work as hard as we can and, give it all. And I don't think so. Like, I'm almost really jealous of the newer generations that are like, I'm working as long as you're paying me. And if you're not paying me, I'm not doing overtime. Or they have limits to things. And some people are like, oh, they don't work hard enough. Or maybe our expectations of the human body and limitations have been a little bit excessive. Like maybe I want to go like to Europe where they have 8 weeks of vacation and 2-hour breaks and like time off, and they're not expected to work at night or over the weekends, and yeah, so I think it's just our culture has really high expectations that I mean, and we see it in drug addiction and mental problems, like that's all mental illness. A lot of that is contributed to the way that we live our lives in this country.
I completely agree with you. I manage 2 units at my real job,
Mm,
and there's a mixture of the younger generation and more my generation and a little bit older. And there's very much that one's looking at the other saying, I don't understand how you do things this way, and I don't understand how you do things this way. But I had an employee who requested, I want to say it was a 3 or a 6 month leave of absence so she could go travel the world and
mm,
decide if she really wanted to come back and settle down at this job. And, the older generation couldn't believe that she would even ask for that. And the funny thing is, I work in government, and you would think it was super, super strict and they wouldn't allow that sort of thing. Well, it was completely allowed. So,
mm,
A, ask, envision that there could be a different way. So she did. They allowed it. I allowed it as her supervisor. And she went off and traveled the world. And when she came back, she decided that she wanted to leave the job. And it's like, okay, well, great. Glad you figured that out.
mhm,
And she was able to envision that it could be different than the expected, you've got to do it this way. You got to work all the time. You got to stay here for this many years. You got to get vested, whatever. Um, and she just decided to do it differently, and good for her. And I told
mhm.
her, I was like, you are such an inspiration to me that you can choose to live your life differently. I think there's very much to that the younger generation and even you mentioned other cultures look at it differently, and they're like, no, we're not going for the way you guys are doing it over there. And I don't
Right.
blame them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's like, I mean, there's nothing in our society to say that the way that we're doing things is the healthiest way, is the best way. I mean, we're not the healthiest country. We're not the most educated country. Like, we don't really top the list of anything except probably exhausted ill people and addiction and amount of people in jail. Like, I mean, these are the things like, so maybe we shouldn't be setting the standard. Maybe we could follow somebody else's standard for a little while. So I love that the younger generation is standing up for themselves and standing up for their mental health and their physical health by saying, no, I'm not doing it that way. And I'm not going to work for $8 an hour because I should have a living wage. So, I mean, I think it's pretty cool. Is there like some of my own core beliefs that were really burned into me that I'm just like, oh, that doesn't seem right. Like you should have to work hard. Yes, of course you have to work two jobs. That's my own history, though. I mean, I don't mind. I would really prefer it if people didn't have to work two jobs, especially if they're single moms or students or, and I had to do all of that. So I mean, if people can change that so that people don't have to do that, I'm all in for it. So, yeah, I think it's really awesome. The younger
It's
generations are, there's probably a balance in between that we're going to have to come to, but I
for
love
sure.
that it's swinging back anyway. It's not getting worse.
I agree. Do you have any advice, or how do you coach your clients on how to find a community to kind of support them? Because I have found that the more people I can surround myself with that are kind of thinking the same, maybe going through a little bit of the same stuff,
Mhm.
it's been so critical to me continuing on this path and not reverting back.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's definitely a ton of communities. I mean, I have one too, but if we look outside of like coaching communities, I would say, I mean, you can always go to Meetup and all those social things. Those are a little harder, but if you're really looking to be able to talk about what's really going on for you and getting support, I would suggest going to womanwithin.org.
Okay.
They're a really great women's organization. There's also mkp.org for men. And those have leaderless circles in which you can join where every woman in the circle is a leader or not a leader, however you want to look at it. But there's no one leader to the circle, but they are, we do trainings. I volunteer for the organization. So we do trainings on how to sit really well in circle with other women, even if you might have a conflict with them, because as much as we all want to sit with women who are just like us, I have found that I actually learn more about myself when I sit with women that are not like me, and that I have conflicts with, because it's in that conflict that I learn more about myself and how I show up and what my beliefs are. Um, and so they have been, Woman Within has been the biggest support for me. Of course, I have therapy and I have coaches, but as far as peer groups, that's one really great place. And I mean, I think all support groups are great, but we don't want to have a specific problem in order to go. So Woman Within is a great place, so that if your problem isn't alcoholism or narcissistic abuse or whatever you might have around, they can support whatever is going on for you.
Okay. I
So
love
yeah, and
that.
I think community is really important. And it's one of the huge things in midlife that women are like, okay, now that I don't have my kids, like, how do I make friends? Because the last time they made friends was probably when their kids were little and they all had play dates, right? And so now it's like, how do I make friends? Like, we don't necessarily want to be best friends with everybody at work because we like to have some boundaries sometimes. And like, how do we make friends? So it's always a big conversation. And I just think that you have to keep showing up to group things. And it's almost like asking somebody out on a date, like to exchange numbers and stuff, right? Like it gets nerve-wracking, but like you mentioned before, we just really have to ask for what we want. And, we may not get it all the time, but not asking, we're certainly not going to get it either.
Yeah. What would be your advice for how to help women handle disappointment when things
Mhm.
aren't moving forward the way they want them to, or aren't going the way they want them to go?
Yeah, yeah. It always reminds me of this quote by a man named Randy Pauch, who said, "Experience is what you get when you don't get what you want." Um, well, recently we made a move cross country and there's a lot of changes. We went from a city to, I'm now 12 miles away from a grocery store. And I live in the middle of the forest with my sister-in-law and her child. So, and we moved into a house that was their childhood home and has collected all the things and gotten rid of nothing. So there's been a lot of change and discomfort, right? And one of the questions that I always have my clients ask themselves is, number one, is this unsafe or is this uncomfortable? And 99.9% of the time, it's just uncomfortable. And the good news about that is that discomfort is usually leads to growth. So you're growing. There's the good news. You may be
Oh,
uncomfortable, but you're going to grow through it and you're going to get more resilient. And I know some people hate the word resilience because I think so many people have justified trauma as like, oh, well, it's just helping you become more resilient. And we wouldn't trade I mean, there's no way we would go through the trauma again for our resilience, right? But there is something really solid about, to me, what resilience is. I can manage my feelings and my thoughts around something.
Mm.
That's what resilience is, that I can manage my feelings and my thoughts around something so that I don't have to fall into a huge pit of despair about it. And usually, why that happens is because we're not willing to look at it. It's
Mm.
uncomfortable. I don't even want to think about it. I want to ignore it. That's why we're so high in addictions in this country, is because that's how we ignore things. And we just kind of hope that they'll go away instead of really looking at our emotional body and looking at our pain and saying, yeah, I need to actually go through this. I think I have a really great friend, and man, every time she gets to the edge of like uncomfortable feelings, she goes right back to, oh, but I should be happy and I should be positive and I should be, and that's why she carries that pain. And I know it, and she knows it. I've told her because, what kind of friend would I be if I didn't point out that possibly this was a thing? But she really doesn't want to feel the feelings. And so they're always just going to stay there. So I think just, we go through it. Go through it. I know it's going to be uncomfortable. Change is uncomfortable. Our bodies are changing. So many things are changing, and it is uncomfortable. And it's natural, and we can just accept that this is the way it's supposed to be. And if believe that the biggest thing of suffering for us as human beings is the world's just not showing up the way I expected it to,
Mm.
right? It's just not what I wanted. And so we create stories about it, and there's a lot of suffering because of that. But if we were to like accept what Rumi said about um, uh, live life as though it were rigged in your favor, then the
Mm.
stories are different, right? Then we would be like, oh, wow, I'm going through this challenge. I wonder what I'm supposed to be learning through this, right? Instead of, oh, why am I suffering? Why does this always happen to me, right? Like, there's different questions to change your perspective.
Oh, I love that. I do believe that mindset is next to everything. I mean, yes, there's very much cosmic stuff that we can't control. We're not in control.
Mhm.
Um, However, I do believe that I am a believer in co-creating with the universe because I have manifested so many things out of believing in it, taking aligned action, all the things, and speaking to the universe and to people around me in my circle what I want out of life, what I'm trying to accomplish. And then all of a sudden, the universe starts kind of showing, highlighting paths for me, putting
Mhm.
people in my path that I never would have met in a million years if I hadn't started telling people I want to be a coach or I want to do podcasting or whatever. So I do believe very much in that it's not, what do they call that? Toxic positivity.
Mm.
I don't believe in that, but
You still got to feel the things. I mean, it
yeah.
doesn't, just because you're manifesting something, or just because I set my intentions as love, open, and bold, does not mean that I don't feel sad sometimes, or angry, or shame, or grief, or fear. Like those, the thing is, those are all very natural. We're supposed to feel those. If we weren't, we wouldn't be built with those features in us, right? Like that's just how we're supposed to go through things like that. It's when we want to avoid them that they stick around. So, and we're complex human beings. I can feel both love, boldness, and openness while feeling fear and while feeling grief. And we can do both, right? We can say, this is where I am and this is what I want. And I can control some things, in that I can go out and do some things that might help me feel love, bold, and open. Or I might just choose to be like, it's okay that I'm sad today. And actually, the boldest thing I could do today is actually sit in my grief and allow it to be with me so that it can pass through. Because if not, I'm just kind of stuffing it, and then it's just going to come out later when I really don't want it to. And
Yeah.
so it's really about both, right? And that's what the intentions are about, is like, we can get so caught up in survival and all these things that we can stay worried about, and we can constantly be fighting the ocean. Or I always call it like getting to shore. That's where, when I ask women, like, what is it that they want? They always want to get to shore, not this. I don't want this conflict with my husband. I don't want to go to work anymore. I don't want this. And so it's like they're just trying to get their head above water, really, and get to shore. And I want them to dream of castles, because the difference between surviving is I'm running away from things that I don't like or I don't want, and thriving is I'm running towards something that I want. That is harder. Thriving is harder for humans because we've had thousands and thousands of years of survival. But that's where we want to put our attention, because when I'm thinking about love, open and bold, I'm not just sitting here in the shore thinking of all the things that I can worry about. I'm now have a focus, right? So even those people who don't necessarily believe in the universe, I want to bring you the science of it. The science is, the more we focus on what we want, the more opportunities we're going to see for it, period. Whether you believe in universe or not, it's like when I start looking for a Ford 150, a white Ford 150, suddenly I'm going to see thousands of them around, because that's what we're looking for. And so that's the energy that we're aligning with, and that's what we're bringing into ourselves. So I mean, whether you science, woo woo, it doesn't matter. We want to be focusing on that thriving piece. It's so that we're not constantly, and I think we get bored, so we just love to survive. So we make up survival things to survive because, dang it, it's easier than thriving.
Oh, that was great. What a great way to sign us off. What do you have websites, ways to contact you, ways to follow you?
Yeah, definitely. You can go to my website. It's Christina-Smith.com. And if you put toolkit/toolkit behind there, there's actually a confidence toolkit you guys have free access to. There's some really cool tools, help you with your intentions, help you seek out your gifts and your strengths, which I think is awesome. And you can find me on Instagram or Facebook, Christina Smith XOXO. Yeah, I'd love to connect with more people. I love this stuff. Midlife is awesome. It doesn't end to tell you otherwise.
It is. I'm having the time of my life. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm loving it. Oh, this is so great. Thank you so much for joining me. I loved this. I will definitely follow you and check out the toolkit. I
Thanks,
appreciate you.
Jen. Thank you. I appreciate you for having me on.
Hey everyone, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. Make sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you get notified of new episodes. Also, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and sign up for my newsletter at shakemeawake.com. I hope you'll tune in again.